Hi, this is Dr. Michael Edelstein and Kevin Benbow, and we're REBT therapists. REBT is Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, which has as its fundamental premise our emotions don't come from situations as just about everyone supposes, but our emotions come from our thinking. So if you have undesirable emotions, you can change your thinking and change your emotions. And if you have disturbed emotions such as anxiety, anger, depression, guilt, that comes from a particular type of thinking that's thinking in terms of demands. Must, should, supposed tos, have tos, demands we put on ourselves, others, and situations. And the psychologic in that is we start with strong preferences. I prefer to do well and get approval, and therefore I absolutely must. I have to do well in my life, get your approval, and if I don't, then this means I'm no good. So we start with a must, with a demand, and we lead to a global evaluation. The second of the three global evaluations comes from a demand on others, not on oneself. And that takes a form of, because I prefer you treat me well, kindly, courteously, lovingly, reciprocally. Therefore, you absolutely must. And if you don't, this means you're a rotten person. And I've just appointed myself your roaster, and I'll roast you in hell in my head. And that's anger, resentment, hostility. And then the third and final must is a demand not on others, oneself or others, but a demand on the impersonal conditions of one's life. And that takes a form of life must be fair, easy, and hassle-free. And if it's not, then I'll be miserable forever. I might as well commit suicide or lie down and bury myself. And that's called low frustration or low discomfort tolerance. So as REBT therapists, Kevin and I help people identify their demands, their musts and shoulds, and we teach them how to change their thinking, which changes their life. Kevin is a therapist, REBT therapist in Yuma, Arizona. Kevin, did you want to say anything more about your practice?
Yeah, I'm Kevin Benbow, and as Michael said, I'm in Yuma, Arizona. I see everybody virtually, so there are no face-to-face appointments available with me. Right now, my schedule is rather full, and so I'm not really taking anybody new. I'm licensed in the states of Arizona and New Mexico, so in order to schedule an appointment with me, if I am available, you'd need to be located in one of those states. If you reside in Arizona, I probably take your insurance, so keep that in mind as well.
Okay, very good. And today we have the good fortune to have as our guest, Grace Francis. And Grace, am I correct? You're an anesthetician, and that's one of your specialties, but you're also interested in the psychological subject of forgiveness. Would you like to say more about yourself, Grace?
Yes, I'm a new author. My book is The Many Faces of a Bully, Abuse, and Addiction, that we are created for healing and restoration. And like you said, I am also a licensed advanced esthetician in clinical aesthetics. And before that time, I worked in treatment centers and managed a group home for abused and addicted teens.
Okay, very good. Now, I think one of the things that interested me when we first spoke, or I came across your work, was I think we have a different view on where addiction comes from. And as I mentioned, we believe our addiction comes from our thinking. So if you're addicted and you'd like to change that, then the fundamental thing is to identify the thinking that causes addiction and change your thinking. Is that your view as well, Grace?
Absolutely, I'd like to share on that. I used to travel with the theater group and I opened at the mic and I said, more people are condemned to die in the prison of the heart and mind than in all the institutions put together, and I was one of them. And I shared at the mic how I overcame my own drug addiction and was set free. So it has totally transformed my life. That was many, many, many years ago. And so out of that change, it went beyond transforming my thinking. I had to transform my lifestyle. So I think what people say you are what you eat. Sometimes you are what you think. And I had to go about and create a whole new avenue of thought.
I see. Okay, very good. So where would you say fundamentally addiction comes from?
For me, I was a food addict. It started after a molestation that I lived through and described in the book. But the food addiction changed when my grandmother took me under her wings and showed me how to eat this and not that. And she helped me with portion control. She took away the dynamics of the fast food and processed foods. She actually paid me to lose weight when I was a child. She kept me for a summer. I was basically overweight as a child and called many fat shaming names, such as my nickname was Fatso. So when she took me under her wing, she transformed the outside of me, but inside I was still hiding a molestation from a serial pedophile who actually went to prison. But I exchanged in high school because I never dealt with my thinking. I exchanged in high school a food addiction for a drug addiction, and that covered up for a rape, and also 3 upper classmates coming to my house with a butcher knife meant for me for saying hi to a guy friend, and she hated me for that. So out of all of those, and I consider that a miracle that I lived through it and got out of that situation. And I talk about how I was divinely rescued from 3 girls with a butcher knife in this book. But that addiction, you have to get to the backstory. You have to get to the core of what is making that addiction prosper. And for me, it was, I believe in therapy. And I saw a cognitive behavioral therapist, and I did the hard labor. The process of better out than in is my motto. I did the hard labor and I took time to address those issues. And then I put a new lifestyle in my head. And I think it takes faith to go through the journey of changing the way you think and being transformed.
Okay, very good. Kevin, did you have any thoughts on what Grace is saying?
I don't really have anything else to add. I personally, I'd like to throw out there with addiction. One thing I could add with addiction is that my experience has been, there is the thinking component, the idea, the craves, the urges that I have to have what I want to have. But then for a lot of substances, especially, there is a physiological component. It's possible to be physiologically dependent on things like benzodiazepines and not even know that you are until you try to stop using them. And then you can have seizures and all of that sort of thing. So, and then of course, there's the behavioral component that's involved as well. We develop rituals around our substance use. And I think the best approach for addictions is those 3 together: thinking, behavior, and then also medications and other medical treatments when necessary.
Yes. Yeah, and you had mentioned a physical component, Kevin. So the way I look at a physical component, the physiology, is this is an influence on your addiction, or if you have emotional problems, anxiety, depression, or anger, there are often physiological influences, but the bottom line is your thinking. And the key to overcoming these problems is by changing your thinking, even though you have these influences. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. However, when we're talking about things, especially highly addictive substances like benzodiazepines, just stopping them cold turkey, you can find yourself in a very serious medical problem. And so there is a physiological dependence that's there that can be completely apart from the thinking. And so that it's really important that we keep that in mind when we're working with people with these kinds of problems.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that there's a physiological addiction, and that your body craves substance when you stop it. But there's also a psychological addiction, and that's what we're talking about. That's where the musts and shoulds come in. Grace, did you want to say something about this?
I know that for myself, I did not only the thought process and change, I changed my atmosphere. I changed my friends. I let go of everything. And we're talking high school. But I think you really have to delete your friends that would pull you down during that time. And you have to make some healthy choices to stay with a program and stay with, a therapist or a church or healthy friends, and absolutely don't go back into that territory unless you're called to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Changing your environment often helps, in addition to addressing the physiological component, perhaps with medication, and especially as Kevin and I emphasis, and rational emotive behavior therapy emphasizes, is changing your thinking. As far as thinking goes, Grace, you used a phrase that might disguise the thinking that's going on, a phrase that I've heard quite often, and that's being called fat shaming names. And my problem with that is that names can't make you feel ashamed, if that's what that expression means. Maybe it doesn't, but names can't make you feel ashamed, but rather it's your thinking about names. If someone calls you fat, it's what you tell yourself about that. I need their approval. This is awful. I can't stand being called fat. That's really the bottom line and the main thing to change. Would you agree with my view of fat shaming names?
It takes a strong person to not let words eat at you. For me, I absolutely, I call them labels, and you have to wear big girl pants, boy pants, and say, I'm not those things. But if one other psychologist said, for every negative thing that is said to you, you need 8 positive things said to you. Some people don't have that much positive around them, and they can let the negative eat them up. So it takes some training and gaining new skills to overcome. And what I did, and I have 20 strategies in this book, but what I did for a while, years ago, is I put Post-its out around the house of positive sayings, positive affirmations, Bible verses, quotes. And that's what I went to bed seeing, and that's what I woke up seeing. And then I play positive music. So I definitely didn't want the labels and fat shaming names to, and actually there's spin shaming too, believe it or not, and mommy shaming too, of all things, because when I was pregnant with my second child, I couldn't lose the weight. I put 50 pounds on, and I couldn't lose the weight for 5 years until I addressed my diet. And I was called a matronly. Oh, you look so matronly. Here I was, like 30 years old, lose the weight, and somebody's saying I look old and matronly. So that actually bothered me a lot. but I worked at, little by little, I couldn't lose the weight until I addressed the diet. I mean, does the label bother me today? Not one bit. And the labels of the past don't bother me at all, but I had to personally address my diet back then, and became more of a whole food type of lifestyle of eating with vegan/flexitarian, because between the food and the exercise, I overcame several health challenges, which made me a believer in that food can be medicine. And so back to the positive sayings, I think you have to put forth effort to create change.
Oh, yes, definitely put forth effort, and also know what effort to put forth. Just putting forth effort is not necessarily going to change if your effort is barking down the wrong tree.
Can I throw something out there?
Yeah,
Mike?
please, Kevin.
The effort is really, I see that as important with everybody I work with. I hear the concepts of rational emotive behavior therapy are pretty easy to understand, which is why I like it. The difficulty is not so much in the concepts as it is the application. It's kind of like we all understand that going to the gym is going to help us lose weight, build muscle, that sort of thing. The problem is not understanding going to the gym. The problem is us getting motivated to actually do it. I'm fortunate in that I sit here all day long and reinforce the concepts of REBT to people. And yet, even so, and even though I have a pretty good handle on my emotions, there are times when I'll experience an activating event and bam, out comes the irrational imperative. And so it takes consistent, persistent, constant work that we apply for the rest of our lives. It needs to become a regular daily part of our routine to engage in the mental training to think rationally. So it never ends. We never arrive. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, and I think the three of us certainly agree on the key and essential aspect of effort, practice, and discipline in changing. It's not easy. And so when I talked about when someone feels ashamed, when they're called fat, I'm not saying it's easy to change or it's easy to think differently. I was just looking at the causation, which is our thinking. Okay, I think we covered this to some extent. Any final words, Grace or Kevin?
Yes. My final words are that I just want to encourage your listeners that it's never too late for a new beginning, a fresh start, or to reinvent yourself and become all that you're meant to be. The reason why I bring that up is for working on this book. There are so many people that I've met that they're in their 70s or 80s or older, and they still have never dealt with their trauma or their pain. And there are answers today, and it's never too late for a new beginning. That's what I would love to say.
Okay, great, Kevin.
No, I like that. It's it's never too late to start. Quite often, people, they think I'm too far gone. There's no hope for me. We can start today. Even if you're 80 years old, we can start today and go forward, right?
Yeah, I had a client who was in her 80s and had an anxiety problem, and she worked on this approach, and she significantly improved. So that's right. It's never too late. It just takes motivation, effort, and discipline. Okay, well, thank you very much, Grace, for joining us, and Kevin. Also, I'd like to mention, while we're talking about books, I'm author of 3-Minute Therapy, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life. So that's another book that I think would be helpful. And I have a few chapters on addictions in that. If you have any comments about this podcast, please write them below. put a like, thumbs up if you liked it, suggest subjects, volunteer to be a guest on our podcast. It looks like Grace survived. And donate to Patreon to support us, and subscribe to 3-Minute Therapy podcast to stay on the rational side of life.